The sun burned high above the desert. The sand shimmered like fire, stretching forever. And there, half buried in the heat, lay a silver-skinned alien woman, barely breathing. Her name was Thyri. Her leg was twisted, metal brace cracked, and useless. Her family ship had disappeared hours ago. A small dot vanishing into the sky. She didn't scream. Not anymore. No one had turned back, not even her sister. They had left her to die. Thyri's throat was dry. Lips cracked. She blinked up at the swirling sky, where giant winged vultures circled slowly. They waited for her to stop moving. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. She was a burden, her father had said. Not worthy of the bloodline, not worthy of returning home. The sun moved, and so did the shadows. Suddenly, the ground gave a faint tremble. Not from the wind, not from beasts. Footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps coming toward her. She turned her head just slightly, too weak to run. If it was a scavenger or a hunter. She'd already lost. Then a figure appeared. Tall and strange. Not alien, but not beast either. A man-human. He wore sand-stained clothes, a cloth over his mouth, and a strange round helmet on his back. He carried a long stick that glowed faintly at one end, and a worn bag at his side. The man stopped beside her. Kneeling slowly, he didn't speak at first, just stared at her broken form with wide, curious eyes. Then he opened his bag. Tay pulled out a metal flask and held it out to her. Water, he said softly, though she didn't understand the word. Thyri hissed, weakly pushing it away, afraid it was poison. The man didn't force it. Instead, he took a small sip himself, then gently offered it again. This time, her fingers trembled as she took it and drank. Cool liquid slid down her throat and she coughed, but didn't stop drinking. When she finished, the man nodded. Satisfied, he examined her leg without touching her, frowning. Then he reached for her carefully, whispering words she didn't know. She tried to pull away, but her strength was gone. Her mind screamed, "Don't trust him. He's human. They're dangerous," but his touch was gentle, his hands warm. He lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing. She passed out before they reached the rocks. When Thyri woke, her body was under a warm blanket. The air around her smelled like smoke and cooked meat. She sat up with a sharp gasp, heart racing, but no chains. No cage, just stone walls and flickering firelight. The human sat nearby, sharpening something with a tool. He glanced at her, then smiled slightly. Not the kind of smile that meant harm. The kind that said, "You're safe now." She didn't know his name, didn't know why he helped her, but when he handed her a soft piece of bread-like food, she took it with shaking hands. He didn't talk much, only when necessary. He spoke in slow, soft tones, as if he didn't want to scare her. That night, she lay near the fire, half awake, watching him. He added more wood to the flame, then looked over at her. He held a small device in his hand, a photo viewer. On the screen was a picture of a young alien girl who looked a little like her, smiling beside a human woman. He stared at the image for a long time, then quietly turned it off. She wondered, was that why he saved her? Did she remind him of someone? Someone he lost? Thyri closed her eyes, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time since her family left her behind, she wasn't cold, she wasn't afraid, she wasn't alone. Then, in the middle of the night, she heard something, a low growl outside. Then claws scraping the rocky walls. Her eyes flew open, heart thudding. She looked at the human. He was already awake, holding his weapon, silent, listening. Whatever it was, it had followed their scent, and it was hungry. Asterisk. The growling outside grew louder, echoing across the stone walls of the shelter. Thyri sat up quickly, her breathing sharp and fast. Her eyes found the human in the firelight. He was already standing, weapon in hand, The creature outside scraped again, its claws digging into the rock. Jake, as she would later learn his name, didn't panic. He moved slowly, carefully, pressing his back to the entrance. The weapon in his hand looked like a long iron rod, but when he clicked a button, blue sparks danced across it. Theory couldn't move fast with her broken leg, but she dragged herself behind a stack of broken crates. Her silver eyes locked on the shadows stretching into the shelter. A heavy breath came through the crack in the door, hot and foul-smelling. Then, silence. The creature waited. So did Jake. Suddenly, the door shuddered. Something hit it hard. Again. And again, dust fell from the stone ceiling. The fire trembled. Jake raised the rod and stepped forward, not afraid. Not loud, just ready, with one final crash. The creature broke through. It was massive, like a desert panther with armored skin, glowing red eyes, and a tail tipped with spikes. It roared, filling the space with rage. Theory screamed, shielding her face, but Jake ran toward it, shouting a word she didn't understand. The blue sparks from his weapon stabbed into the beast's side. It hissed and swiped at him. Tearing part of his jacket, he rolled, came up, swinging again, this time straight into its throat. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. The beast thrashed, knocking over crates and tools. Trying to escape the pain, Jake leapt to the side, took a sharp spike to the shoulder, but didn't stop. With a final jab, he drove the rod into the monster's eye. It screeched, twitched, and then collapsed in a heavy heap at his feet. Blood dripped from Jake's arm. His face was pale but calm. He looked at Thyri and nodded. "You're all right," he said quietly. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the feeling. Jake dragged the beast's body outside, far enough that other predators wouldn't smell it nearby. Then he returned, wiped his blade, and lit more firewood. He didn't speak much after that, not even when he stitched his own wound. He winced, but didn't cry. Just gritted his teeth and tied a cloth tight. Thyri watched from the corner, her heart still racing. She didn't know humans were like this. Weren't they supposed to be soft? Weak. But this one had fought a predator twice his size with no armor, no shield, and still won. That night, she didn't sleep. She stayed awake, watching the flames and the human across from her. He reminded her of the ancient guardians from her people's stories, but her people had abandoned her. He hadn't. In the morning, she found a piece of cooked meat on a stone plate beside her. It smelled strange, but not bad. She looked at Jake with a question in her eyes. He took a bite of his own and nodded toward hers. She slowly took a bite. Was chewy, but her body welcomed it. After breakfast, he brought her a stick and gently motioned toward her leg. He wanted to help her stand. She shook her head at first, too scared, too much pain, but he waited patiently, crouched beside her, hands out but not touching. When she finally let him help, he guided her to her feet. Her legs screamed, but she didn't fall. Step by step, leaning on him, she walked the length of the shelter. It felt like winning a war. Later that day, Jake brought out an old device and image box. He pressed a button and a hologram appeared. It showed a young alien girl, maybe 10 years old, laughing beside a human woman. Thyri stared at the girl. She looked like someone from her own race. Same skin, same eyes. Jake said nothing. Just looked at the image, and then at her. Was that girl someone he had lost? Is that why he saved her, because she reminded him of that child? That evening, the desert wind howled outside, but inside the shelter, it was quiet. Thyri sat closer to the fire, and Jake handed her a blanket. She nodded her thanks. He nodded back. They still didn't share a language, but something was beginning to grow between them, a silent understanding, a thread of trust. As the flames danced in the darkness, Thyri whispered something in her own tongue. Just one word. Her name. Jake looked at her and repeated it. Carefully, Theory, she smiled, and for the first time in days, she felt like she wasn't just surviving. The desert sun rose slowly, lighting the rocks in golden fire inside the shelter. Theory sat near the warm ashes of the fire. Her legs still hurt, but it no longer felt like it was useless. Jake, the human, was outside, gathering something from Theory, a bundle of strange cactus-like plants. She peeked through the opening, watching him work in silence. He moved carefully, slicing the plant and draining a thick blue liquid into a jar. She didn't know why, but she trusted him now. Her people had thrown her away. This man, this human stranger, had fought for her, fed her, stayed beside her when death circled close. He had no reason to, and still he remained. Later, he returned with more dried meat and cactus jelly. He offered it to her, then sat down and opened a small toolbox made from scrap metal. He took out her broken leg, braced one cracked when she fell during her family's evacuation. He studied it, frowning, then looked around the shelter, searching for parts. She watched in surprise as he began repairing it. No, not just repairing it. Looked like he was upgrading it. Welding a stronger hinge, attaching a layer of leather. Padding, it was old tech, mismatched, but she could see the focus in his eyes. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, he held it out toward her. She hesitated, then reached for it. He helped her strap it on, tightening the sides, then stepped back, silently asking her to try it. She stood slowly, carefully placing her foot down. Pain shot up her thigh, but the brace held, strong and stable. She took one step, then another. She didn't fall. Her heart swelled. "Jake," she whispered, pointing at him, then touched her chest. "Thyri," he smiled and repeated her name again. The way he said it was different from how her people did, gentler, like it meant something special. They spent the day in silence, each doing their tasks. She helped organize supplies, clean tools, stack wood. He let her work without treating her like she was broken. But just as the stars began to peek through the sky, something felt wrong. The air grew heavy. The desert wind stopped completely. Even the insects went quiet. Jake stood near the door, frowning. He grabbed his weapon, the sparking iron rod, and motioned for Theory to stay back. She did, but her eyes were wide, ears sharp. Then it came, a deep, low sound, like rocks grinding together. The same growl from the night before, but louder, closer, angrier. This time, not just one. Jake peeked outside and froze. Two glowing eyes stared back at him from the darkness. Then another pair, and another. 3 beasts, not one. They were hunting together now. Thyri grabbed a sharp metal shard from the corner, standing behind Jake. Her leg ached, but fear sharpened her spirit. Jake didn't argue, just nodded. The first beast leaped through the doorway, massive. Horned, armored like stone, Jake met it with a heavy swing of his rod, sparks flying as it struck flesh. The second creature smashed through the wall, sending debris flying. Thyri ducked and rolled, slicing at its leg. It roared in pain, but didn't fall. Jake turned, back to back with her. They fought side by side, heat with fire and sparks. She with speed and rage. The third beast charged, slamming into them both. Jake was thrown across the room, crashing into crates. Thyri hit the ground hard, her breath knocked away. One of the beasts lunged at Jake, ready to tear him apart. Thyri screamed. Forcing herself to her feet, she ran and threw the sharp metal like a spear straight into the beast's neck. It gurgled and fell beside him. The second one came for her. But Jake, bleeding from his forehead, grabbed a burning torch and shoved it into its mouth. The beast howled and stumbled outside. The third creature, seeing its pack fall, growled once, then fled into the desert. Silence returned. Jake dropped the torch, Panting hard, Theory leaned against the wall. Trembling, blood dripped from his face, and her arm had deep scratches. But they were alive. She looked at him, eyes wide. He met her gaze. Then laughed softly, not a loud laugh, just a quiet, relieved one. She blinked. Then laughed to a strange sound from her throat, but real. He sat down and pulled out a cloth, handing her one too. They cleaned their wounds quietly, no words. Needed only the fire crackling and their breathing, still together. Still fighting. That night, as they patched the wall, Theory looked at the blood-stained floor. She wasn't the same girl who had cried in the sand. She had fought back, protected someone, not because she had to, because she wanted to. Jake looked over, gave her a small nod, pride in his eyes. She nodded back. The desert was cruel. But they were becoming something stronger than fear. The fire was low, casting shadows across the stone walls. Thyre sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the flames. The taste of blood was still in her mouth, but her heart was calm. She had survived another night, not alone, not running. She had stood and fought. Side by side with the human who refused to leave her behind, Jake was asleep, his back resting against a wall. One hand still gripping his weapon, his head leaned forward, hair messy. Face bruised but peaceful. Even in sleep, he looked like someone ready to protect. Thyre looked down at the repaired brace on her leg. He had fixed it for her with scraps and patience. Her people, her own family, had said she was broken. This stranger saw something else. She picked up a small stone and started carving lines. Into the dirt, symbols from her native script, soft curves and dots. She wrote her name, Theory. The firelight made the marks glow faintly. She touched the name with her fingers and whispered it again. Thyre. Jake stirred. Opening one eye, he looked at her, then at the strange marks in the dirt. She pointed to them, then to herself, Thyre. She repeated, slower this time. He sat up, nodded, and said it too, carefully, thy, ... She smiled gently. He almost got it right. She picked up another stone and handed it to him. He raised an eyebrow, but took it, with slow movements. She guided his hand to the dirt. He scribbled something that didn't make much sense then. Paused, he turned the stone, used the flat edge, and drew 5 English letters. J-O-K. She tilted her head. Confused, he pointed to himself. Jake. Theory blinked. Then nodded. Jake. She said quietly. He smiled back. Something shifted that morning. Their names were no longer just sounds. They were promises. Proof that they existed, that they mattered. The next few days passed slowly but peacefully. They hunted together. Fixed tools, cleaned wounds. Jake showed her how to use the heating device and how to patch tears in cloth in return. Theory showed him how to spot signs of underground water using tiny crystal insects that only came out at night. They spoke using gestures, pictures, and short words. Sometimes they laughed at mistakes. Other times, just shared silence, but never. Once did Jake treat her like she was weak or strange. He treated her like an equal. One afternoon, Jake returned with something small in his hand. He opened it carefully, an old data chip, rusted but still working. He plugged it into a small screen device, and the display lit up. Theory moved closer. Curious, on the screen, images began to play, memories frozen in time. She saw a younger Jake, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and dark hair. Between them stood a girl not human, but not fully alien either. She had silver blue skin, like Theory wide eyes. And a bright laugh frozen in the image. Theory stared at the girl for a long moment. Jake's expression was hard to read, sad. Proud, maybe both. He didn't speak, just watched the screen with heavy eyes. Thyre touched the screen softly. The girl in the image looked just like someone from her own people. Was she his daughter? Adopted? Lost? Jake didn't explain, and Theory didn't ask. But that night, she couldn't sleep. The fire crackled quietly, but her mind was full of questions. Why had he saved her that day in the sand? Was it because she looked like the girl in the picture? Or was it something more? She turned toward him, watching him sleep again. His face looked softer now, not like a warrior, but like someone who had lost too much. She whispered her name again, but this time not for herself, for him to hear. Thyri. Jake's eyes opened slowly. He looked at her, and without hesitation, whispered back, "Thyri." She smiled again, then pointed at him. "Jake?" He chuckled quietly and nodded. No one had said her name with such care before. No one had ever made her feel like she belonged to anything, not until now, that night. She leaned back and stared at the stars through the shelter's opening. Her people lived somewhere out there. But she no longer missed them, not after they left her like trash, not after Jake picked her up like something worth saving. Now, she had a new name, not just Thyri, the weak, or Thyri the shame. She was Thyri the fighter, Thyri the survivor, and Jake, the human, the stranger from another world. He was no longer just her rescuer. He was her anchor, the first soul to ever remember her name. The desert wind howled softly as Jake and Thyri climbed a hill of dry rocks. The sun was fading, casting long shadows behind them. They had spent the morning collecting supplies near an old crash site Jake spotted on his scanner. He hoped they'd find fuel cells or shelter materials, but what they found was something else. At the bottom of the hill lay a pod, half buried in red sand. Its metal walls were scorched, broken, but not completely dead. Strange symbols were scratched along the side. Thyri's native script. Her steps slowed, her chest tightening. She recognized the markings. Clan Virith, her own family's crest. Jake looked at her, confused by the way her eyes changed. Fear, anger, and something else. Hesitation. He stepped toward the pod carefully, weapon ready just in case. As they neared, the pod door creaked, hanging open by a thread of metal. Inside, it was dark. The air stale and cold. Thyri stepped in first, heart pounding, then she gasped. Lying against the wall was another alien woman, unconscious, injured. She had the same silver skin, same glowing blue veins. Her hair was braided in the high pattern of nobility. Her sister, Jake, stayed back, watching Thyri as she dropped to her knees beside the woman. She pressed 2 fingers to her neck. There was still a pulse. Thyri took a shaky breath, then looked back at Jake. "Sister," she said slowly, pointing at the woman. Jake nodded. Stepping forward with his medkit, for the next hour, they worked in silence. Cleaning wounds, sealing cuts. The woman's breathing improved, and by sunset, her eyes fluttered open, confused, weak, and then filled with shock as she saw Thyri. She tried to speak, but coughed hard. Thyri gave her water. "Vena," she whispered, calling her by name. Vena blinked, then said something fast in their native tongue. Jake couldn't understand, but he didn't need to. He could see if this wasn't a happy reunion. It was a storm. Thyri's voice was quiet, but firm. She questioned Vena, asked why she had been left behind. Vena looked away, ashamed, and then the truth spilled out like venom. Their father had seen Thyri as a flaw, a birth without the gift, a rare genetic energy her people prized above all else. Without it, she could never lead, never hold power. She was considered useless. A soft shame hidden behind smiles, until the day came when hiding was no longer enough. During the evacuation, he ordered her abandoned. No goodbye, no explanation. Vena had followed the order, even when her heart said no. Furious fists clenched. Jake stepped beside her, his face hard. He didn't understand the language, but he knew betrayal when he saw it. Vena cried quietly, whispering apologies. But Thyri didn't reach for her. She stood tall, now not the broken girl from the sand. But someone reborn? Jake glanced around nervously. "This place isn't safe," he said, pointing to the scanner. Motion nearby, Theory nodded and helped Vena stand. Her sister was weak, but not helpless. Together, the three of them made it back toward the shelter, moving fast, but halfway through the canyon trail. They heard distant roars, followed by thudding footsteps. Jake's scanner beeped again 6 signals, fast-moving, surrounding them. Thyri grabbed Vena's arm and pulled her behind a boulder. Jake crouched beside them, weapon humming. "They followed us," he muttered. "Or they followed her." Vena looked guilty again. She whispered that her pod's distress signal had been active for days. Pirates, slavers, or worse, could have tracked it. Thyri's eyes narrowed. She turned to Jake, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Trap," she said. Then pointed to herself and Vena. "Run." Jake shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "We fight." He pulled out an old EMP mine and shoved it into the sand behind the boulder. Thyri helped set up rocks as barriers, while Vena, trembling, loaded a plasma bolt into a broken rifle. When the beasts and men came dust rising around them, they didn't find prey. They found a trap. The mine exploded, sending waves of shock through their tech. Thyri leaped from the rock, slashing through a stunned pirate with a jagged blade. Jake shot the second attacker in the leg, knocking him down. Vena missed her first shot, but the second hit its mark. It was fast, brutal, loud. But in the end, they were still standing, bloodied, shaking, but alive. The attackers ran or lay silent in the dust. Jake dropped to his knees. Exhausted, Thyri helped him up, her hand steady. Vena looked at her younger sister, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking, but Thyri didn't answer. She turned to Jake, pointed at the desert and said softly, "Home." Jake smiled, and for the first time, so did Vena. Asterisk smoke curled from the edges of the canyon as the last of the attackers fled into the dunes. Thyri stood with her chest rising fast, blade still dripping, her leg brace smeared with red dust. Jake crouched beside a boulder, gripping his bleeding shoulder, and Vena, her older sister, was on the ground, shaking, the rifle slipping from her hands. They had one, but only barely. The broken pod in the canyon had become a beacon for death, and now it had to be erased. Jake pulled out his last flare and tossed it toward the pod. The fuel cell inside was still active and stable and waiting. The explosion came seconds later. A thunderous roar that lit the evening sky with fire. The shockwave hit them like a slap of heat, knocking Vena down again, but the signal was gone. Thyri didn't look back. She helped Jake to his feet and threw his arm over her shoulder. Vena followed behind, limping, holding her burned arm. Tight to her chest, they walked in silence for hours, heading back to the shelter. But when they arrived, the shelter was no longer safe. The front wall was crushed, the fire pit destroyed, and claw marks stained the rock. Jake cursed under his breath. Something had found the place and tore through it, looking for them, everything they had built together gone. Thyri stood in the middle of the ruin, fists tight. She wasn't just angry. She was tired of running, of hiding. She looked around the broken shelter, then turned to Jake and said quietly, "We make new." Jake nodded, wincing in pain. He was losing too much blood. They found safety in a nearby cave, hidden beneath stone and shadow. Thyri built a fire quickly, while Vena helped clean Jake's wound. He didn't complain, but his hands trembled. Vena looked at her sister and shook her head. "If he doesn't rest," she said, "he won't survive the night." Deary grabbed the old medkit from their pack and worked fast. She had watched Jake fix her leg, watched him stitch his own wounds. Now it was her turn, with careful hands. She cleaned the wound and pressed the heated seal pad against it. Jake grunted in pain, but didn't move when she was done. He opened one eye and gave her a weak smile. "You're getting good at this," he whispered. She didn't understand all the words, but the way he looked at her was enough. That night, the three of them sat around the fire, wrapped in quiet. The air smelled of smoke and ash. And somewhere outside, distant beasts howled to the moons. Vena broke the silence. "I thought you were weak," she said, staring at the flames. "I thought you'd die in the sand." Theory didn't answer. She simply looked at Jake. Then at her own hands. She wasn't the same girl who cried under the vulture's shadow. "Not anymore. You became something I couldn't," Vena continued. "You didn't need a throne or powers or a name, just someone who believed in you." Jake shifted slightly, eyes closed but still listening. He didn't know it, but he had changed everything. Theory finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You left me," Vena lowered her head. "I did," she said. "I was a coward." Silence fell again, broken only by the crackling wood. Then Theory stood and walked to the cave entrance. She stared out at the stars, the cold wind brushing against her skin. The sky was wide, endless, full of places she'd never seen. She turned to Vena. "Go home," she said. "You still have a place there." Vena's eyes widened. "You're not coming?" Theory shook her head. "My home is not with them," she said, pointing at the stars. "It's here," Jake stirred, blinking awake. "Everything all right?" he asked groggily. Theory crouched beside him, tucking the blanket tighter over his chest. "Yes," she said gently. Sleep. Vena watched them both. Then, with trembling hands, she pulled the crest badge from her belt and placed it in Theory's lap. A small silver disquance, a symbol of honor. "Now a farewell, for when they ask, 'Who saved me?' she said, 'I will tell them it was you.'" Theory didn't answer. She just closed her hand over the badge and nodded once. In the morning, Vena was gone. She left without a sound, leaving behind only her footprints and a quiet promise carried on the wind. Jake woke slowly, his strength returning. He looked at Theory sitting by the fire, polishing the broken blade she'd used. "In the fight, she's gone?" he asked. Theory nodded. "Family?" she said softly. "Sometimes they leave." Jake sat beside her, shoulders still sore but smile returning. "But the right ones stay," he said, touching his chest. She looked at him, then leaned her head on his shoulder. Outside, the desert stretched on, but in the cave, there was warmth, there was fire, and there was the start of something new. The desert morning was quiet, painted in soft pink and gold. Inside the cave, Jake lay still, wrapped in his worn blanket, his chest rising slowly. Theory sat beside him, holding a warm cloth to his forehead. He had lost too much blood. The wound was healing, but his body was weak. He hadn't woken in hours. Theory chewed her bottom lip. Trying not to panic, she kept the fire alive, gave him water drop by drop, crushed roots into paste and rubbed them gently over his wound. Everything she had learned from watching him, she used now. But the man who had once carried her through the desert was now the one fading, and it tore at her heart. She whispered his name again and again. "Jake, Jake." No answer. Outside, the wind moved slowly, carrying dust across the sand. No beasts hunted today, no threats nearby. It was as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Theory took the clan badge her sister had left and stared at it. It was cold in her hand, shining with power and bloodline. She remembered how badly she once wanted to be accepted, to sit beside her people, to be called daughter, warrior, heir. But now, none of that mattered, not when the only one who believed in her was slipping away. She placed the badge beside Jake's hand, then reached out and gently gripped his fingers. "You didn't let me die," she whispered. "You gave me a reason to stand again." She leaned close to him, her forehead touching his. "Now, it's your turn," she whispered. "Come back." Time passed slowly. The fire burned low. Her eyes began to close, but then a cough, a sharp inhale. She sat up fast. Jake's eyes blinked open. "Water," he whispered, voice dry as bone. Theory nearly cried as she grabbed the flask and helped him drink. He coughed again, then smiled. "Weakly, you look like you've been crying," he joked. She touched his face, smiling and crying all at once. "No cry," she lied. "Just dust." Jake chuckled and winced, holding his side. "Hurts," he muttered. "Alive," she answered softly. "Alive is good." They stayed like that for a while, silent, close, the fire warming their backs. Later that day, Jake was strong. Enough to sit up. Thyri brought him food and helped him eat. He watched her as she moved, calm, capable. No longer the frightened girl he had once carried. "You're different," he said gently. She looked at him, confused. He pointed to her heart, stronger. She smiled. "Because of you," she said. Jake shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "Because of you." That night, they sat outside the cave, watching stars appear one by one. Jake leaned against the rock, arms still stiff but healing. Thyri rested beside him, her eyes following a shooting star as it cut across the sky. He turned to her. "What will you do now?" he asked. She thought for a moment she could follow her sister back to her people. She could try to take back the place they stole from her. But then she looked at Jake, at the man who had seen her when no one else did, who fought for her, healed her, taught her how to survive. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a small stone. She placed it in his hand. "Gift," she said. Jake studied the stone. It was smooth, shaped like a crescent moon, glowing softly with blue light. "What's it mean?" he asked. She pointed at herself. "Thyri," she said, then at him. "Jake." Then touched the stone, together. Jake smiled, his eyes soft. He closed his fingers around the gift and nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. Together, days turned into weeks. Their shelter moved deeper into the rocky cliffs. Hidden from storm and beast, they built with scrap and stone, cooked simple meals, learned each other's languages bit by bit. Jake taught her how to fish with string and bone. Thyri taught him how to read the stars. When the rains came, they danced barefoot in the mud. When cold nights returned, they shared fire, stories and laughter. There was no royal court, no clan honor, no title, but there was peace. And there was something deeper, something stronger, the kind of bond that didn't need words. One evening, as they sat beside their new fire, Jake took her hand. "You saved me," he whispered. Thyri looked at him and shook her head. "No," she said softly. "You saved me first." He smiled. "Then I guess we're even." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "No," she whispered. Now we live, and the desert, for the first time, felt like home.